My grandma was known in her community for her yeast rolls. Luckily for her family and friends, the recipe was good enough and large enough to make both breakfast and dinner with a single bread making dough. While I have shared my grandma's yeast rolls before in another video, I'm happy to take these rolls a step further, like she did, and make her yeast rolls and cinnamon rolls from one recipe, one batch. With the holidays around the corner, this recipe will save you time, energy, and make most everyone you know happy. Thanks to my family and close friends for whom I have made both of these rolls recently. They reminded me of what a wonderful Southern cook and baker my grandma was. This is the time of year I spend in the kitchen baking, being thankful and recalling those who have positively impacted my life. Let's get to it. For the yeast roll ingredients, you'll need yeast, granulated sugar, salt, shortening, eggs, all-purpose flour, and water. In addition, for the cinnamon roll filling and frosting, you'll also need butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, powdered sugar, vanilla, and cream or milk of any kind. So here's a quick rundown of these rolls. We first make one batch of yeast roll dough. From that, we will divide the dough in half. We'll use one half to make a batch of yeast rolls and the other half to make a batch of cinnamon rolls. It's that simple. Let's make the dough. We begin by activating the yeast. So in a small bowl, we're gonna add 14 grams, which is 2 packages or 4.5 teaspoons of active dry yeast. You're gonna measure out 38 grams of granulated sugar, and then from that, we're gonna take 13 grams, which is 1 tablespoon, and add that to the yeast. Give that a quick mix. And then we're gonna measure out 118 milliliters, which is a half a cup. This needs to be really warm water, so between 100 and 110 degrees. And then we're just gonna pour that into the yeast and sugar mixture, give it a stir. The warm water and the combination of sugar and yeast will activate the yeast. Once you have this stirred well, we're just going to set this mixture aside to become bubbly and frothy, and it'll take about 10 minutes. In the meantime, you want to boil 472 milliliters, which is 2 cups of water. You can boil it in a tea kettle over the stove, or as I did, in a measuring cup in the microwave. And then just set that aside for a few moments. In a large bowl, we're gonna add 96 grams, which is half of a cup of shortening. And I cut my shortening into smaller pieces because those little masses will be easier and quicker to melt once the boiling water hits it. And this is how my grandma always made her rolls. She melted the shortening using boiling water. So once you have the shortening in the bowl, you're going to take that really hot boiling water and you're going to pour it over the shortening. We want that shortening to melt. So once you pour the boiling water in, my grandma used to break up those little pieces so that they will melt a little bit quicker. Just stir it around. This will only take about 2 minutes. My shortening is all melted, but the shortening water is still very, very hot. So this is where I like to go ahead and add the sugar and the salt. So we're gonna add the remaining 25 grams, which is 2 tablespoons of the granulated sugar. And we're gonna add 23 grams, 1 tablespoon plus 1 teaspoon. Seems like a lot, but it's not for this big batch of dough. And this is salt. And I like to add the sugar and the salt in while the water is still hot because it will help dissolve the salt and the sugar more quickly. And it only takes a few seconds for both of those to dissolve. So now we just need to set this aside because we want this water to cool down to that 100 to 115 max degree temperature. Okay, so once this is cooled down, we're gonna add the yeast mixture, and that's why we need the water to cool down because we don't want to kill the yeast. Check out that yeast. It has really bubbled up. So this is a great yeast going here. If your yeast does not do this, if it doesn't really do anything, that means it's dead and I would start with a new yeast. So we're gonna pour that yeast into the cooled, wow, look at that. Give it a stir. Okay, so now we're gonna add in 2 eggs, one at a time, slightly beaten. So I always put my eggs in a separate container just to eliminate any egg shells or a bad egg for that matter. Good stir, pour it in. So now we're gonna go with our second egg. Quick beat and pour in. Okay, and you also now want to stir it all together. For both rolls, we're gonna have a large batch of dough. So we need a total of 840 grams of flour, which is 7 cups. But we're dividing that flour and adding it a little at a time. My grandma always did this. So she started out with 4 cups, which is 480 grams of all-purpose flour, and I'm going to sift it. I've learned that making her rolls over the years, sifting the flour is best because it provides the lightest roll that you can have. So I sift the flour, but I just sift it in the bowl. But you don't have to. If you are in a hurry and you just want to get this done, you don't want to have to worry about sifting, or you don't have a sifter, then I've made these rolls without sifting my flour, but I prefer to sift it. So then just pour the flour in. And then again, regardless though, you want to start with 4 cups because we need to stir little at a time. So start stirring the 4 cups in. You can use a whisk if you'd prefer. A whisk helps to break up that initial flour. Okay, so that's what your dough should look like with a little bit more than half of the flour. And then we're gonna sift in the remaining 3 cups of flour, which is 360 grams. And again, if you're not sifting, then just pour the flour in. Okay, now I move to my spoon because the dough's a little bit thicker, and then I just stir in the remaining flour. You need a strong, sturdy spoon to mix in that last bit of flour. So you could see it's a very thick, dense dough. However, it's still a wet dough. Okay, at this point we need to cover it. So you could cover your bowl with a towel or with plastic wrap. I do either or, and I also do both. For the plastic wrap, you just might want to spritz the inside of the plastic wrap with cooking spray because your dough will likely rise to the top of the bowl and touch the plastic, and it just makes it easier for the plastic to detach from the dough if it's sprayed with cooking spray. So at this point, we're going to set it aside for an hour. For a quick warm-up, you can place the covered dough over an oven that's set at 200 degrees, or in the oven with it turned off if you have an incandescent light bulb. The heat will generate from that light bulb, warm up that environment, and help to raise your dough. Or for fun, if it's a warm day, set it outside away from drafts. We're just going to set mine over on the stove. While the dough is rising, we're going to grease 2 9 by 13 inch casserole dishes. So I prefer to grease my dishes with butter. That's what my grandma always did. And plus, I love that extra bit of richness that butter adds once the rolls are baked to the exterior of the bread. Easiest way to do it is just open up a butter package where you just touch the paper, and then you can just spread the butter around and your hands don't get dirty. You could also just use regular cooking spray, it's whatever, or oil, it's whatever you have. Then set both grease pans aside. Check it out, our dough has more than doubled in size. It's ready to go, and this was an hour. So this is why I sprayed my plastic wrap. No dough, very little dough left on the wrap. All right, so you're gonna wanna flour a work surface because this is where we're gonna do quite a bit of kneading. So then we're just going to scoop it out, and it'll deflate as we scoop it out onto the work surface. Now this is a wet dough, it's a sticky dough. We're gonna knead it enough and add enough flour so that it's no longer sticky, but tacky, and I'll show you what that looks like. Okay, it's very, very wet, so you're gonna really need to flour everything really well. Okay, and you're gonna need to it may start to stick to the surface, so just keep adding flour. Because this is such a wet dough, you could actually add as much as a cup of flour while you're kneading it, and that's okay. We just don't want it to be sticky. We wanna make sure it gets kneaded well. So I'm just sort of bringing it together right now so I can start the kneading process here. It's so soft, it's like a pillow. You can hear the bubbles popping as I'm doing a light little knead here. And as you begin to knead, the dough is just gonna be really, really soft until we get it kneaded out, get those bubbles popping out, and get this gluten sort of developing here. So you're just simply gonna do a 10-minute knead. There are lots of different ways to knead. This is my preferred method. I just shape the dough until it's a small ball, and then I push it forward with the heel of my hand, lift it up, rotate it around, and keep doing it over and over. Again, lots of flour. It's okay if you use a lot. So press, fold up, press. You can do 2 hands. There's lots of ways of kneading. You can choose one. If you already know how to knead and you have your preferred method, then go for it. Okay, I'm at the end of my 10 minutes. And at this point, I'm not having to add hardly any flour, just enough to keep it from sticking to the board, but it's really not sticking. I mean, really, we are that tacky consistency now, so we don't have any sticking to our hands, so you really don't need to be adding much flour. Now we're gonna divide the dough. So you can divide it in half just by eyeballing it. Just sort of find the center spot and then cut it. And if you want to weigh it, then weigh the whole thing together and then, or divide it until they are equal weight. Once you divide your dough, go ahead and place 1/2 back into the bowl. Cover it so that it doesn't dry out and set it aside. And then we're going to knead the other half for about another 3 to 5 minutes, not very long, but since it's a smaller dough, we're able to knead it really, really well to get anything that we miss, maybe that's on the inside of the dough. And at this point, you really don't need much flour, if any at all. My 3 minutes or so are up. Again, tacky, not sticky. We're going to put this one back in the bowl and switch out. We're going to let this one rest while we knead the other half for about another 3 minutes. So same as before, just start kneading it. All right, so now we're gonna make the yeast rolls. So take the dough half that you just kneaded. We're gonna swap out the dough halves because this one in the bowl has been resting, and now we need this to rest before we roll it out. So this one's gonna be our cinnamon roll dough. This one's gonna be our yeast roll dough. So go ahead and cover your cinnamon roll dough up and set it aside. Okay, so go ahead and flour your surface again. All right, so you can either use a rolling pin or just use your fingers. You're gonna push out the dough to about a 1 to 1.5 inch thick disc. Keep that surface floured. You're gonna need about a 2-inch biscuit cutter or cookie cutter or a small glass. And then basically all we're gonna do is cut out rounds. Like so. Just cut out as many as you can from this batch that you've flattened out. I like the little shape rolls as opposed to big round ones. So take what you've cut out, begin to line them in the pan, and they can touch. So I'm in my 9x13 pan, I'm getting 4 rolls across, and then we'll just see how many we get down. Okay, so that's what we have so far. Just set those aside. Gather up your remaining dough. Give it a quick little knead just to smooth the dough out. Start flattening it out like we did before, again about 1.5 inches. Now, if you only want to make yeast rolls and you don't want cinnamon rolls, then you could do the same thing with the other half. Or if you want cinnamon rolls, all cinnamon rolls instead of yeast rolls, and you want 2 big pans, then just make cinnamon rolls out of both of these halves. Okay, this is it of my rolls, so I'm just going to place the remaining rolls in the pan. I even got a spot for an extra one. This is the last bit of dough. It's about the same size as the other rolls. So I'm just gonna shape it to look like the other rolls and just place it in the pan. So that's our pan of yeast rolls. You should get 22 to 25 out of this pan. At this point, you have a couple of options. So if you wanna bake your rolls within the hour or so, then go ahead and cover them with a towel or plastic wrap and then place them over in a warm area. If you wanna bake them tomorrow, wrap them in plastic wrap, stick them in the refrigerator, and they will rise overnight. Take them out about 30 minutes before you want to bake them, heat up your oven, and then they'll be ready to cook and bake by the time that 30 minutes to an hour is up. If you want to bake these weeks to months down the road, wrap them really well, stick them in the freezer, let them thaw overnight in the refrigerator, and then follow the same procedure, thawing on the counter 30 to 60 minutes and then baking them. That's all it takes. So you can bake them now, tomorrow, or later. While our yeast rolls rise, now we're gonna focus on the cinnamon rolls. So my dough's been setting aside, just sort of resting. We're gonna let it rest a few more minutes while we make the cinnamon filling. To a small or medium bowl, we're gonna add 216 grams, which is 1 cup packed brown sugar, and I'm using dark brown sugar. I've used light and dark. They both work just fine. I prefer dark brown sugar in this recipe because it has a little bit more molasses in it, and so it provides a deeper flavor than just light brown. We're also gonna add 10 grams, about 1.5 tablespoons of cinnamon, and these are called cinnamon rolls, so I want them to have that strong cinnamon flavor. And I use Ceylon cinnamon, which is known as, or claimed to be, the true cinnamon. It comes from Sri Lanka. And the kind that you typically buy in the store, if it's not labeled Ceylon, then it's going to be Cassia. Cassia cinnamon comes from a couple of different countries. And the main difference between the two is that Ceylon has negligible coumarin in it. Coumarin is a toxic chemical, and it's toxic if you eat too much of it. From what my understanding is that you don't want any more than 1 teaspoon of Cassia cinnamon in a day. Okay, and then make sure that you just mix up really well your cinnamon and brown sugar. And we're gonna set this aside. Go ahead and flour your work surface again. We're gonna remove our cinnamon, well, it's not cinnamon yet, but the other half of our yeast roll dough. You can give it just a quick little knead just to sort of release all those bubbles since it's had a chance to rest, but then also rise a little bit. Keep that work surface floured. Now you're going to press or use a rolling pin and then just roll it out to about an 18 by 12 inch rectangle. If you notice that your dough starts to retract, just stop for a few moments, allow it to get used to its new rolled out shape, and then continue rolling. My yeast roll dough is now out to about 18 by 12 to 13, a little bit wider on the sides there, but that's okay. Now you want a stick of butter, which is 113 grams, and you want it softened. So it should be at room temperature. If your room temperature is colder than soft like this, then dice your butter, stick it in the microwave for about 10 seconds, and then it should be soft. If not, add another couple seconds to it. We're taking this butter and then just smoothing it out all over the dough. I'm just using the back of a spoon. Spread that butter edge to edge, end to end. So now that our butter is spread entirely over any visible dough, go ahead and take your brown sugar and cinnamon mixture and just evenly sprinkle it all over the butter. I like to make sure I get those edges. Okay, once you pour out all of that cinnamon brown sugar, then just spread it around. It moves very easily over the butter and the dough. Take your hands and press down so that the brown sugar and cinnamon adhere to that butter. Start at one short end, which is basically the one closest to you, and then just start rolling up. And it rolls up very easily and quickly. Scoot it down here so you can see it. So now we're going to cut our long log into 12 relatively equal pieces. I'm not going to weigh these, so just try to find the center. This is the easiest way I've found to cut cinnamon rolls. So now we're going to get 6 from this side and 6 from this side. So from this side, cut that side in half. Okay, so we're going to get 3 and 3, 3 and 3. Then from the same side, we're going to cut each of these quarters after we cut this here. So now we have quarters, each quarter into thirds, and that should give us 12. So the ends are not always the prettiest, but I like to put those down in my pan so you really don't know that it's an end. And then I like to use my knife to scoop up the rolls. And you want a serrated knife to cut. You could also use flavorless dental floss. I know people do that too. And then we're just cutting all the way down. Our cinnamon rolls are gonna stick together. Okay, I'm getting my last 3 in the pan. Okay, our cinnamon rolls are ready to rise. At this point, we could do the same as we did with the yeast rolls. In fact, you could bake one now and then refrigerate or freeze the other and save them for a later date. It's your choice. So I'm gonna bake both of mine in the same day. So I'm gonna go ahead and cover my cinnamon rolls and put them over the stove with my yeast rolls for the moment. We're gonna let them rise 30 to 60 minutes, which this is what's great, is because our yeast rolls have been rising for a while we were getting our cinnamon rolls ready. Now they're ready to go in the oven while these rise. When they come out of the oven, we can put these in. The timing is just perfect for consistent movement. If you wanna bake these the next day, cover them well with plastic, put them in the fridge to rise overnight, take them out about 45 minutes the next day. Whenever you're ready to bake them, heat up your oven, put them in. It's that simple. To freeze them, same thing. Wrap them in plastic, put them in the freezer, take them out into the refrigerator overnight to thaw and to rise. Then take them out of the fridge about 45 minutes before you're ready to bake them. And they should rise a little bit more and be perfect. So 30 minutes before you're ready to bake your rolls, whichever ones you're baking, preheat your oven to 350 degrees. Now, I'm gonna move my cinnamon rolls over to the stove and just place them on top where it's warm so they can rise. Right, my yeast rolls they've been rising 30 to 60 minutes. So since I have one oven and my cinnamon rolls are still rising, I'm gonna go ahead and place my yeast rolls in the oven. We're gonna bake them for 25 minutes or until golden brown. If making both rolls ahead of time, You can bake the cinnamon rolls in the morning for breakfast and the yeast rolls in the evening for dinner or whenever you want them. My grandma's rolls are hot out of the oven, so I'm gonna set them down for the moment and show you the cinnamon rolls. They have risen, and so now we're gonna put them in the oven for the same amount of time, 25 minutes or until golden brown. So like my grandma always did, is brush the tops of the rolls with butter. And of course I do what my grandma did. So you can stab a tablespoon of butter and you can rub them over the tops, or you can do as I did in greasing the pan, which was just taking butter in the wrapper and then rubbing it on the top. So we want these rolls nice and buttery, and I use salted butter. I want that salty goodness on the tops of the rolls. I get along the edges too. Okay, now that these are nice and buttered, I like plenty of butter on mine. Now, these are ready to eat. You can go ahead and cut into them, particularly if it's lunchtime, dinner time, or you just want a nice buttery yeasty snack. And then go for it. Add some more butter to the insides, let it melt, and oh, it's so good. Or you can let them cool. So that's what I want to do for a bit, is let them cool. Cinnamon rolls are hot out of the oven. Notice I have a couple of little gnarly centers poking up there. Could have been a result of too tight, but notice how beautiful the others look. So, and even those with the little gnarly centers, a little novelty item actually. Okay, so we can make the frosting now and frost them. The frosting will ooze down into the center of the crevices along the sides, but you won't have a thick look at the top. If we let these cool and make the frosting, then the frosting is gonna sit up high and it'll be like having a cake with a thicker frosting. So it's your choice. You can frost them now while they're hot or frost them after they cool. To make the cinnamon roll frosting, we're gonna start with a small to medium-sized bowl. To that, we're gonna add 360 grams, which is 3 cups of powdered sugar. I have another cinnamon roll recipe video, and that's my typical go-to one, but this is like an extra special treat because these are my grandma's yeast roll dough. And so for her rolls, I'm going all in with lots of frosting. My other recipe is a little bit lighter on the hips, but this one is all in. So we're gonna also add to that, all that powdered sugar, 2 teaspoons of vanilla. If you wanna keep a really light color frosting, then I would use clear vanilla. And you can buy clear vanilla, it's usually in a specialty store. Then we're gonna add in some, I'm using half and half today. Sometimes I use heavy whipping cream, sometimes I use regular milk, whole milks, I've used skim milk. I've also used a plant-based milk like almond milk. It's whatever you have, but I love the really white color of the heavier creamed milks. So that's what I tend to gravitate towards. And we're gonna add between 3 and 4 tablespoons. I'm gonna start with 2. I want my frosting really thick because I want it to sit up on the cinnamon rolls. I just think that makes it look so elegant and indulgent. But if you want a thinner frosting, then just add another tablespoon of milk until you reach the consistency that you like. And then you just want to stir it. You can use a fork. I often use a fork. I'm using a whisk right now. The whisk just makes sure it gets all the lumps out of the powdered sugar. Okay, the frosting is ready. That's the consistency I'm going with right here. But you can add a little bit more milk if you want to. This is about 5½ tablespoons of milk for me. The rolls have cooled enough that I'm ready to frost mine. Notice the nubs have disappeared. I actually ended up going back and pushing them down in the center, and it worked. Taking the frosting, I'm just going to use a spoon, and I'm just going to start spreading out the frosting over each roll. Then you can connect them with any frosting that remains. So I like to think of these as sort of a cake frosting. I really want to be able to see it. I want it to be thick. The cinnamon rolls are all frosted. The frosting is almost as thick as a cake. Ooh, now we can dig in. Both rolls are made and baked, so now let's take a look at each. Looking at the yeast rolls, notice they're nice and brown on top and nice and brown on the bottoms, along the sides as well. Notice how much they've risen. Remember how little they were in the pan when we put them in there initially? So we've got a nice coating of butter on top. Check out that rise. Okay, we can pull them apart. They have a nice, soft, stretchy crumb. They are light and airy, just as you would think grandma's rolls should be. My house smells all buttery and yeasty. I'm gonna tear a couple apart so you can see the inside of the ones that are in the pan without edges. Imagine these with a pat of butter and you're all set for a nice holiday meal. Cinnamon rolls are all nice and frosted on top, golden brown on the bottom. You can even see all that cinnamon goo at the bottom too. So we've got yummy goodness all over these cinnamon rolls. Okay, let's cut into one and take it out and see what it looks like. I love that there's enough frosting that it seeps down the sides, particularly if your cinnamon rolls are just still a little bit warm. Oh, check out that yummy tall cinnamon roll. So you can see we have a nice rise in the yeast dough. Let's cut into the center here. We have the cinnamon and brown sugar dispersed well throughout the layers. You can see it here as far as on the edge, on the bottom, and then throughout. The crumb is soft, light, and airy, like the yeast rolls. You can't go wrong with the sweet frosting. This is certainly heaven on a plate, screaming indulgence and holiday time. You can store both the yeast rolls and the cinnamon rolls covered at room temperature for several days. Keep in mind, the longer they sit, the more they dry out. So I prefer to store them both wrapped well in the freezer, removing only what I want and microwaving them until heated through, just about 30 to 45 seconds. You can do this from frozen. This way they will stay fresh while frozen. If you're looking to make both yeast rolls and cinnamon rolls this holiday season, or whenever you get a hankering for fresh bread, I highly recommend my grandma's version. It's a total 2-for-1 deal, saving lots of time and effort during a very busy time. Not to mention, they are incredibly good. Thanks for allowing me to share my family's recipe with you. And as always, I appreciate you watching, liking, and subscribing. Until next time, make a little time in your busy schedule and go bake the world.